This is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be told up some of our Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Monster Blood 2. This was one I read but maybe never finished, because when I picked it up this week, I was already resentful of it for lacking Cuddles the hamster. But really, this book has plenty of Cuddles, and even includes a gigantic Cuddles that gets into a wrestling match with Evan on the last couple pages. Although that may sound exciting, this book is a slog to get through, so maybe I'd given up before it got interesting. Also, I am now all aboard the Evan hate train. I didn't mind him in the first one, but he really does suck in this one. If you skip this book, you are not missing much. Despite not enjoying the story, this is one of my favorite covers. I read that Jacobus ranks it among one of his favorites too, because he had such a good time trying to make a hamster look evil. I think he succeeded, and Cuddles looks a little feral. I'd still keep him though. It's also a nice change of pace that this cover is a direct scene from the book. Overall, it's just a really fun cover and almost makes up for the story itself. The 2004 version gets points right away for me, just for having a purple and green combo going on. It crops out some of the classroom and makes Cuddles the sole focus, which isn't terrible. I just don't get what these reprints have against a little background room. There was no later 2000s reprint, probably because the Monster Blood books are pretty well known to suck at this point. Monster Blood 2 had about as much merchandise as I expected it to. It's a fun cover, and Monster Blood itself is easy to market, so we had our usual trading cards, a classroom folder starring Cuddles, some Goosebumps holographic jewelry, including a ring, as well as a holographic Cuddles necklace. Monster Blood 2 was also included in a pack of mini puzzles, and even had its own full-size puzzle. One thing that I came across and loved was this Cuddles mousepad that I wish I owned. Monster Blood 2 also had its own pocket scream machine, and I can only hope that this was a hamster growling. Monster Blood 2 also got a card of its own with the Cuddles Diner Club card that says, "This card isn't for wimps who play with their food or push it around on their plate. It's for hardy eaters who want to grow big and strong, just like Cuddles after a meal of Monster Blood." But unlike Monster Blood, this card has no expiration date, so you don't have to worry about sudden shrinkage or lack of growth. I can't hear the word shrinkage and not think of George Costanza.
I'm really sorry.
I was in the pool! I was in the pool!
This book was also included in the Monster Blood pack, where you get the first 3 Monster Blood books, and some Monster Blood of your very own, and no merchandise section would be complete without the mention of a Pog. Our front tag says, "He is one hungry hamster." And if only this were true, Cuddles shows a lot of restraint in this book and doesn't devour anyone, sadly. Our back tag says, "It's back," which is fitting since this is our first official sequel of the Goosebumps series, and I'll never understand why this was chosen out of all of our options. Before we get into the summary, let's read the blurb on the back of the book. Evan Ross can't stop thinking about Monster Blood and what happened last summer. It was so horrible, so terrifying. Too bad Evan's science teacher doesn't believe him. Now he's stuck cleaning out the hamster's cage as punishment for making up stories. Then Evan's friend Andy comes to town, and things go from bad to worse, because Andy's got a present for Evan. It's green and slimy, and it's starting to grow. Alright, now that we finished that up, let's jump into the summary. The book begins with our reintroduction to Evan Ross and his Cocker Spaniel Trigger from the first Monster Blood book. Evan is currently cornered in his living room by an enormous and ever-growing Trigger, who has found himself some more Monster Blood to eat. Trigger lovingly picks Evan up in his mouth and hauls him off to the backyard to stick him in a hole and bury him. Are you confused? You should be. These first few pages are of course just a dream sequence, and a really poorly done one at that. It really felt like I was entering the book on like chapter 3 or something, because there was no context, and then it's like, surprise, it's only a dream. But no shit it is, because nothing was making any sense. Evan comes to in Mr. Murphy's science class, and wakes up ready for a fight as he immediately begins yelling at his classmates about how Monster Blood is real. I guess Evan is still processing through the trauma of the last book. Mr. Murphy is lovingly described as enormous, round, pink, with chubby hands and small black eyes. He doesn't have time for Evan's stories because he teaches science, not science fiction. Evan doesn't take kindly to this and cleverly retorts, "Well, you're dumb," which draws gasps from his classmates. This wouldn't even register as an insult to me with what kids say in the classrooms nowadays. Evan earns himself an after-school punishment, which involves cleaning Cuddles, the class hamster's cage. This is apparently the 3rd time he's had to do this because of his shitty attitude, but I guess Evan's finally had enough. He hops to his feet and says, "I won't do it. I hate that stupid fat hamster." Yeah, well, Cuddles hates you too, you.
Buster! You old horny slut!
We're not done yet though, because Evan then grabbed Cuddles in one hand, then with an easy, graceful motion, he flung the hamster across the room and out an open window, in a chapter cliffhanger. Now, this is quite the introduction to a main character of a story. I can't imagine many kids reading this and thinking, wow, Evan is so cool, he kills hamsters. This should be pretty obvious, but in case you weren't sure, this is just another daydream. The Monster Blood books, despite having an evil blob that can eat anything, prefer to focus on dream fake-outs and animals growing big. Evan laments to himself that he can't make any new friends at his school because Mr. Murphy is making him look like a jerk in class. Why is this mindset so common in real life? Nobody likes me, but it couldn't possibly be my own shitty personality. No, it's somebody else's fault. As Evan is putting away his stuff in the locker, we're treated to an introduction to Conan Barber, who everyone calls Conan the Barbarian. Stein must love Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he frequently gets dropped as our pop culture reference. Conan the Barbarian is not a fan of Evan, because when Evan tried to tell Conan about Monster Blood when he first met Conan, Conan said, "We don't like wise guys down here in Atlanta." Because Conan is like a 1920s gangster of the school, I suppose. Conan has knocked Evan to the ground and is now offering to let Evan get one free hit in on him. Evan takes this offer because he thinks it will improve his school's social standing if he can manage to hurt Conan the Barbarian. This backfires and Evan's punch ends up hurting his hand worse than it hurts Conan. Mr. Murphy also catches the tail end of this interaction, and Evan gets in trouble for fighting. We're then treated to an exciting multi-chapter event. As Evan is cleaning Cuddles' cage, the hamster escapes, which leads to a few pages of Evan chasing Cuddles around the classroom, only for it to culminate in the hamster hopping out the window. Don't worry though, we're ground level here. Evan hops out the window and we continue this chase across the playground for a whole chapter, until Conan the Barbarian finally gets a hold of Cuddles. Conan tries to get Evan to sing "Row, row, row your boat" in front of a group of kids in order to get Cuddles back, but Evan refuses. Mr. Murphy appears and Conan convinces him that he saved Cuddles after Evan released him into the wild. This leads to Evan getting in trouble with Mr. Murphy once again. In response to this, Evan wonders who he hates more, Mr. Murphy or Cuddles. I feel like he's forgetting a very obvious antagonist in his list of enemies. Evan then fantasizes about sticking Cuddles into a muffin tin and baking him in an oven. Evan is incredibly unlikable in this book. He was a bit of an ass in the last book, but he just sucks, full stop. Or maybe I'm just biased because I'm never gonna like a character who has an intense hatred for hamsters. This book just won't stop at the Stein cliches, and we end the chapter with Evan getting shoulder scared into the bushes. This turns out to be no one other than Andy, his cooler sidekick from the first book. She just so happens to be living with her aunt and uncle in Atlanta a few blocks from Evan's house. What a coincidence, and not a contrivance. Evan likes Andy because she's funny and fearless and kind of crazy. She also didn't even dress like the other girls Evan knew. Andy loved bright colors. I think Evan found his very own junior manic pixie dream girl. Andy reveals that she'll be starting school next Monday with him, only for him to reply with his trademarked "Frills and chills." I just can't wait to see what hijinks these two will get into, by golly. Evan is mostly excited about Andy's return because now she too can be the weird kid in school by telling everybody about Monster Blood. Andy reveals she can do better than just tell them about Monster Blood, but then says Evan will just have to wait to find out what she means. She couldn't possibly be alluding to showing them Monster Blood, could she? That would be just crazy. The next day at school, we get some more Conan the Barbarian, with him tying Evan's shoes together and pouring water into his seat so it looks like he peed himself. Mr. Murphy also accuses Evan of making Cuddles sick after the little outdoor adventure the day prior. Evan thinks Cuddles is faking it to make him look bad, because hamsters are notoriously clever like that. After school, Evan sees Andy again and she has a surprise for him. She reveals the surprise to be, of course, a can of Monster Blood. Surprising miracle substance. Andy tells him now that the kids will at least have to know he's not making the whole thing up because he has a can to prove it. But sadly, it's empty. Except, a couple sentences in a chapter cliffhanger later, no it's not. It actually has Monster Blood in it now because reasons. Our two heroes deduce that there must have been a tiny speck at the bottom that decided to start growing when the plot called for it. Andy thinks this is good news though, because now the kids will have to believe Evan. Evan is on board at first, but then he remembers an entire book exists on why playing with Monster Blood can end poorly. They debate on how to dispose of it, only for Conan to appear and offer to take it off their hands. Evan outsmarts somebody for once and ends up handing Conan an empty bag with no Monster Blood in it. Conan picks on Evan and Andy for a bit and then exits the scene. They look into the can of Monster Blood and discover it's already doubled in size since being exposed to air. They settle on burying it, which if you're familiar with horror movies, has never worked once in the history of anything ever. Evan returns home and we learn that his dad is an artist. In fact, he's crafted an enormous sculpture called The Wheel, which just will so happen to be at Evan's school at an art show later this week, so I can't wait to see how that will factor into later events in this story. We're then back at Evan's school, and he's trying out for the school basketball team with Conan and his minions. I don't know why Evan would even bother with this, but I guess we need to fill the story with something. Evan starts the tryouts on a high note by getting knocked the fuck out with a basketball shot to the head via Conan. We then move into Looney Tunes territory, and at one point Conan literally picks up Evan and stuffs him into the basket. Mr. Murphy even has to get a stepladder to get Evan down. Like this happened and wasn't a daydream. Leaving me wondering, just how big is Conan, the 12-year-old? On the walk home, Andy and Evan decide Mr. Murphy, of all people, needs to be taught a lesson. And I'm assuming this will involve Monster Blood, because we're at the midway point of this book and the Monster Blood is still somewhat contained. They settle on feeding Cuddles some Monster Blood to teach Mr. Murphy a lesson, because that makes sense to these two. They go to dig it up and dun dun dun, it's gone. They realize that Conan must have watched them bury it and conclude the only reasonable thing to do now is to break into his house and steal it. They lurk outside Conan's house past 8 p.m., and when the coast is clear, they start to make their moves, only to be attacked by a guard dog. But not really. Trigger just showed up from across town to help them break in, I guess. We're really just not confined by logic in any way in this book. They end up crawling through a kitchen window and leave Trigger out front. They make their way up to Conan's room on the second floor and pause to admire a Michael Jordan poster because it's 1994. They quickly find the can of monster blood, only for the lid to immediately pop off and begin overflowing, because plot. As Evan struggles to get the monster blood back in the can, they hear someone slam the front door downstairs. Conan shouts, "I'm home," only to have another voice respond, "We're home too," which makes no fucking sense. Conan and his parents have had to enter the house at the exact same time, while simultaneously not seeing each other for this to work. Whatever, this is small potatoes, but it's just an example of how lazy this writing is in this book. Evan's hand is stuck in the monster blood can, but he doesn't have time to deal with that, as he and Andy climb out the bedroom window and balance on the ledge. They're on each side of the window as they listen to Conan blast rap music and dance around his room. They decide once he goes back downstairs, they'll sneak back in the house and race out the door. Then, Trigger notices them on the second floor window ledge and begins barking at the house. This causes Conan to come investigate, and we get a chapter cliffhanger with Evan falling off the ledge. Except, not really. You should know this by now, but Stein likes to change his mind by the start of the next chapter, often. And no, Evan isn't falling, he just thought he was. Conan heads downstairs for dessert, and this gives Evan and Andy time to escape, with only one brief moment where they think Conan's gonna catch them on the stairs. They burst out of the house and race to Evan's. Once in the safety of Evan's driveway, Andy helps Evan get the monster blood can off his hand, because Evan has been running around with this can stuck to his hand this entire time. They get it off, and Evan's hand is now all pruny, like he's been swimming for hours. A little longer, and maybe we could have had a de-gloving like in Gerald's game. Evan makes Andy promise to bury it in her backyard because he no longer wants to feed it to Cuddles. She says okay, but we all know she can't be trusted, and we still got 40 pages left. The next day, Evan has a sore throat and spends the day reading comics and watching MTV instead of going to school. The following day, he returns to Mr. Murphy's class and discovers that Cuddles is now the size of a rabbit, so it looks like Andy indeed cannot be trusted. Mr. Murphy accuses Evan of overfeeding Cuddles, and Evan wants to fat shame Mr. Murphy in response, but thinks better of it. He then spends the rest of class glowering at Cuddles, who seems to be growing right in front of Evan's eyes. Evan tries to confirm with Andy that she did in fact give Cuddles some monster blood, because it's not like it's obvious or anything, but gets caught by Conan as per usual. Evan then tries to call Andy that night, but is unable to reach her. This whole chapter reads as filler while we wait to see more Cuddles. That night, Evan has a nightmare that Trigger ate some monster blood and then ate the mailman. Real riveting stuff. He wakes up at 6 a.m. from his nightmare and then decides to head to the school extra early to see the damage on Cuddles. He walks into the classroom and essentially sees the book's cover art. Cuddles is now so large he's erupting from the cage. Also, it amazes me through all of this, Evan shows no concern for this poor hamster, who is just living his hamster life and just trying to exist. We cut to him updating Andy on the situation, and he lets her know they ended up putting a dog leash on Cuddles and tying him to Mr. Murphy's desk. Andy thinks this is all hilarious and shows no remorse for what she's done. Mr. Murphy has changed his tune and now thinks Cuddles is going to make him famous, and he looks forward to some potential news interviews. Evan wants to double check the monster blood can to see if there's any instructions on how to reverse it, because I'm sure we went an entire book just not noticing if there were. We jump to the next day, and Evan and Andy attempt to arrive to school early to see Cuddles, only for this plan to go awry since Andy needs to do some outfit changes. Again, this all feels very necessary, and not at all like padding to get to a page count. Once they reach the school, they see chaos in Mr. Murphy's room. Cuddles is now 10 feet tall, and Mr. Murphy is trying to keep Cuddles back with a chair like a lion tamer. Cuddles devours the chair and looks ready to find his next victim. I can appreciate this part of the story because a 10-foot hamster is awesome. It just would have been so much better without having to deal with Evan and Andy for 103 pages to get to it. Evan suddenly remembers his father's sculpture in the auditorium, so he and Andy race there to bring it back to the classroom. The thought process is that Cuddles will treat it like a giant hamster wheel to either lose weight and shrink down, or it will distract Cuddles long enough for them to figure out what to do next. They wheel the wheel to class, because two 12-year-olds can move an enormous metal sculpture large enough to fit a 10-foot hamster, all on their own. All of this ends up being for nothing anyways, because once Cuddles learns he can't eat the wheel, he just destroys it with his angry little paws. So this wheel subplot was really worth the time spent on it. Mr. Murphy reveals he called the cops, but they didn't believe him because they thought it was just a prank call, so it's still up to Evan to defeat Cuddles. Evan reveals his new plan, which involves him eating enough monster blood to outgrow Cuddles, and I guess defeat him in hand-to-paw combat. In the meantime, Conan becomes our asshole victim. As Cuddles is taken to playing with him, Cuddle knocks Conan around and gives him a few licks as Conan streams for his mother. Evan and Andy reach the locker and discover monster blood oozing out. Evan gets the locker open only to immediately get slooshed in monster blood in a chapter cliffhanger as he realizes he's drowning in it. Not for long though, because Andy is able to yank him out by his ankles. Evan then proceeds to eat a handful of monster blood without concern for how this could massively backfire. Imagine if it had started to eat Evan from the inside out, in a horrible twist where Evan is sucked inwards until he explodes, thus ridding us of him and preventing 2 unnecessary sequels. Evan immediately begins growing, and when he re-enters the classroom he's as big as Cuddles. He's able to grab Conan out of Cuddles' paws and sets him down. We're completely ignoring ceilings, I guess, because based off how things are going, Evan should be as big as this goddamn school. It turns out Evan has stopped growing, and he and Cuddles are now equal size. Cuddles decides to throw down and wrestles Evan to the ground. Cuddles weighs much more than Evan, so he finds himself being pinned to the ground by a giant hamster. Cuddles decides to do us all a favor and goes to bite Evan's head off in a chapter cliffhanger, only for there to be a pop, and Cuddles vanishes. Except not really, just out of nowhere, both Evan and Cuddles are now back to their regular sizes. I'm sure this has a great, well thought out explanation that won't feel like cheap bullshit at all. Andy looks at the can and starts laughing. It turns out that there's an expiration date on the can that's never been mentioned before, and it just so happens that the expiration date is today. What a truly great twist. The magic is worn out. Mr. Murphy congratulates Evan for being such a hero and suggests he tries out for the wrestling team, even though we all just watched him get pinned by a hamster. We cut to dinner that night and Evan tells Andy how all the kids have apologized for not believing him and how he's a hero. Mr. Murphy then stops by and gives Evan a reward, which ends up being Cuddles. I feel like there would still be some lingering animosity between these two. Andy reveals a surprise of her own. Her parents sent her a gift from Europe and, shocker, it's more monster blood. Her parents knew how much fun she had with the last can, so when they spotted some in Germany, they mailed it to her. Andy, in an attempt to prove that she really is worse than Evan, lets us know that she already opened it, but has no real plans to do anything with it this time. The fun's not over yet though, because on the last page Evan shouts, "Cuddles, what are you eating?" Hopefully a draft of Monster Blood 3. There isn't a direct episode based off the book, but there is a sequel to the first Monster Blood episode titled More Monster Blood. Since there's no story to go off for context, I'll read the episode description. While on the plane flying to Atlanta to meet his parents, Evan is horrified to learn that the Monster Blood is on board. I hope this can live up to the standards set by Snakes on a Plane, so let's get started. I like that they managed to write Conan the Barbarian into this non-book sequel.
What's this monster blood junk you guys are talking about?
Just leave me alone, Conan.
Yeah, you gonna make me?
Hey, Conehead. Why don't you just give it a rest, huh?
Goosebumps loves camp.
So, you guys are all friends?
Well, we went to camp together. I don't think Conan has any friends.
Wow, we have airplane food jokes.
I thought the food at the camp was gross. It's even worse. I mean, I don't even know what it's supposed to be.
I would like to try it.
When we were at camp, all I ate was parsnip juice and tofu.
It's really not that bad.
Preteen romance is in the air, and I'm Curtis.
I could introduce you around. That'd be cool.
I still love the monster blood itself that they use in the episodes. We're skipping hamsters and going to giant ants, it appears. I will hold my bladder till it wants to explode before I use an airplane toilet, so the idea of someone going in there to wash their face is craziness to me. The monster blood dissolved her Wicked Witch style. I like when the monster blood just starts sucking people under like a graboid. I like Conan's strategy of just feeding it random shit so it can grow faster. Airplane food makes it vomit. Got it. We're going all in on this airplane food joke. I respect Curtis's willingness to sacrifice Julia.
No, I don't think you'll fit. She'll fit. There's dust up there.
It's actually too bad we can't watch anyone get sucked in.
It's coming right for me!
I like that the climax scene is just throwing lettuce at these kids. What a 90s closing shot. Not gonna lie, I forgot about that ant completely. Overall, I thought Monster Blood 2 was a big ol' letdown. Although, can something be a letdown if you weren't expecting anything good to start with? Evan is an awful protagonist who continues to be whiny, mean-spirited, and just all-around unpleasant. Andy is on par with Evan in unlikability, so at least they're a good pair in that sense. This book has just one fun scene in it, which is obviously the 10-foot cuddles. The rest of the book is just filler made worse by Evan and Andy. I'm gonna give this one 2 out of 5 hamster wheels. Cuddles is the only thing that stopped it from being our first 1-star book. You go, Cuddles. Monster Blood 2 had one other thing going for it, and that was adding quite a bit to our Goosebumps totals. We had one shoulder scare in Monster Blood 2. This is when we are first reintroduced to Andy as she yanks Evan into the bushes. This brings our series total to 16 shoulder scares. Monster Blood 2 contained 2 It's Only a Dream fakeouts. These were the opening of the book where Trigger was burying Evan in the backyard, and Evan's daydream where he violently throws Cuddles out the window. There were actually a bunch of other dreams in this book, but these were the only 2 where we were supposed to think it was actually happening. This raises our series total to 7. As to be expected at this point, vomit count remains at 0. I refuse to get rid of this category on the off chance that I'll be finally vindicated. Monster Blood 2 had just one asshole victim, Conan the Barbarian, specifically when Cuddles decides to rough him up for a bit. This brings our series total to 15 asshole victims. In getting jiggy with the 90s, I counted 4 jiggy 90s moments. These included Conan the Barbarian, Michael Jordan, Dayglow clothing being sported by Andy, and cool MTV. This raises our series total to 78 jiggy 90 moments. Monster Blood 2 had just one It's a Prank Bro. This air quotes prank was when Andy fed Cuddles Monster Blood to get back at Mr. Murphy. They sure showed him. This brings our series total to 29 It's a Prank Bros. Monster Blood 2 had a total of 11 chapter cliffhangers, and they were on par with the rest of the book. Not great. This raises our Goosebumps series total to 217. The clunky cliffhanger award for this book goes to chapters 1 to 2, with the opening of the book trying to keep us in suspense as a giant Trigger buries Evan in the backyard. It didn't work, and it was just a very clunky opener to the book. I guess it set the tone though. Shocker ending. Our big twist to this story was Andy's parents mailing her even more Monster Blood from Germany, and then having Cuddles eat it. Can't wait to see how this plays out in Monster Blood 3. This brings our Goosebumps series total to 13. Well, that's it for Monster Blood 2. I think this was the worst book so far, and it is lucky that it had Cuddles, or it truly would have had nothing going for it. Next week, I'll be doing something a bit different with a video on Disney's MGM Studios' ill-fated Goosebumps Horrorland Fright Show and Funhouse. I figured this would be a nice placeholder as I go on vacation for Thanksgiving break. After Thanksgiving break, we'll be back on track with Deep Trouble, which I know is notorious for having cover art that has zero to do with the plot. Be sure to let me know what you thought of Monster Blood 2 in the comments. Are you a Monster Blood fanatic? What are your feelings on Evan? Would you feed a hamster Monster Blood? Also, what did you think about giant horror clips this week? Anyways, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
The pride, the love,